Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 133.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to sharing useful information on true custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques. I create exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores. A few months ago, I saw a post on Twitter that led me to buy a great putting improvement book, The Lost Art of Putting by Gary Nicol and Karl Morris. The book is a great read, and I particularly love the putting performance principles that the book is based on. So I contacted Gary and Karl, and they agreed to do this interview with me. They talk about some excellent putting principles that all golfers can use to enjoy their putting more and to make more putts. So enjoy this fascinating interview about the lost art of putting.
www.gameimprovementgolf.com.
Hello, this is Tony Wright with episode 133 of the Golf Improvement Podcast. And today I welcome the authors of a great book, The Lost Art of Putting. Gary Nicol, who's a 30-plus year golf coach who's coached Ryder Cup players and golfers of all levels, and Karl Morris, who also has a great podcast, the Brain Booster Podcast, who's a performance coach and who has coached golf major winners and high performers in many other sports. And it's an interesting time to do this with you guys because I just saw a note that this is just about the 1-year anniversary of when The Lost Art of Putting came out. Which is kind of cool. I just saw an email about that, I think 2 or 3 days ago. So that's kind of a neat thing to have happen. So,
it's been an exciting year for us.
Yeah. So let's start a little bit. I always like to hear a little bit, and I think listeners do too, about personal stories. Gary, a little bit about how you became a golf instructor, and Karl, how you became a performance coach.
Sure. Do you want to go first, Gary? Yes, my story as a golf professional, I guess, started when I became an assistant professional at a place called Royal Guernsey Golf Club in the Channel Islands, which sits kind of halfway between the most southern point of England and France. So I started off my professional career there as an assistant, and basically, back in the day, an assistant golf professional wasn't a very well paid profession. So in order to eat, basically, we did a bit of coaching, and what we did was we did 9-hole playing lessons. So we basically played for our fee. So, we charged whatever it was. I can't remember exactly the number from back then. But so if we lost, we won nothing. But if we won, we got twice our fee.
Yeah.
So you kind of learn pretty quickly how to play, but also, in the whole process of this, we were actually giving the guy a golf lesson as well. So we were giving the guy a golf lesson and tried to beat them at the same time. So, it was quite an interesting introduction to professional golf. And from then, I went through the PGA training and whatever. And then I became friendly with a couple of guys who had just got there were a couple of guys who were a little bit older than me who'd got their tour cards. And I actually did a bit of caddying for them for a while as well. And then one guy called Andrew Oldcorn, who won 3 times on the European Tour, including their kind of flagship event, the PGA at Wentworth. One year he just asked me if I could help him out. And it kind of led on from there. I went to a couple of tournaments with him, and he did quite well. And as you know, a lot of golf pros are very superstitious. So he kind of figured that if he played well because I was there, he better take me more often. So I started on a journey on the European Tour, I guess, as a coach in 1995. and then worked with various players for a number of years. I spent about 16 years pretty much full time on the European tour, traveling the world. So it was quite a journey.
Pretty neat journey, it sounds like, too. Yeah.
It was an interesting one for sure. Yeah, I got to see the world and got to meet lots of interesting people and go to see some exciting places and earn a living at the same time, helping golf pros.
Well, Karl, how about you then?
Yeah, similar but different, I suppose. I mean, I started off a bit like Gary as an assistant pro and wanted to play the game, and was spectacularly unsuccessful at that, really, because a classic story of being good on the range and being able to hit good shots and reasonable technique, but never quite being able to transfer it onto the golf course. And then I did what a lot of people do who fail at playing. I started to teach other people the same stuff that had got in the way for me. And after a period of time thinking, I'm just seeing the same thing happening with players that was happening for me in my career, that maybe the technique improved a little bit and on the practice ground, but it wasn't transferring onto the golf course. And I just became more and more interested in other factors, really, the performance side of thing. How did the mind and body interact to either allow you to play good golf or to get in the way? And I looked at all kinds of different disciplines in a game, and NLP, CBT, you name it. I had a look at it and studied and kind of went away from the game for a couple of years and then came back and relaunched things and more on the performance side, and got lucky with a couple of players who'd been struggling and they did pretty well. And then it went from there. Worked with Darren Clark when he won one of his WGC events, and other players came on board, Graham McDowell, and it sort of escalated from there. And Louis Oosthuizen was a client that won the Open at St Andrews in 2010 with not just because of a technique that I'd given him, but it became quite famous when he had a red dot on his glove, and it got a lot of press. And
yeah, that's right.
It kind of escalated from there, really, and been fortunate to work in other sports, in cricket and football, and one or two others. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and we keep seeking the answers. So it's a sort of winding road that never ends, but it's a pleasant road to be on.
It sure sounds like it is. Well, there must have been some kind of an initial spark for the two of you in terms of creating the Lost Art of Putting book. So talk some about that, but maybe a little bit too about how easy or difficult it was to actually get all this stuff down on paper.
It was actually relatively easy because, me and Gary had known each other probably not as much as we realised. We'd been on tour together, and I'm sure we'd had conversations, but a few years ago we started to do seminars up at Gary's place up in Scotland, a beautiful place called Archerfield, which for anybody listening you should put on the bucket list. It really is a spectacular place to be, just near Muirfield. And we started to do these clinics in different parts of the game, but it seems specifically with the short game, with putting, we were getting some really, really interesting results. We'd spend three hours or so with people and never mention a single technical intervention, but we noticed people's putting strokes were getting better, and they were actually putting better and enjoying holding the putter in the hands in ways that they'd not done for a while. And we both sort of said, we need to get some of these ideas down. There must be a book in this somewhere, because it was almost like a throwaway comment. And we put all the ideas together, and we came up with 6 key principles, and we got a publisher interested, and it went from there. And it's been amazing in the last 12 months. It was just at the Scottish Open. It launched 12 months ago, and the response has been phenomenal, really. We keep getting feedback on a daily basis from people all over the world that it's just a different way of approaching the game on the greens, but also it filters into other parts of the game as well.
Well, Gary, any extra comments on that part?
Yeah, I think basically, as Karl said, it really wasn't that difficult to put our thoughts down. I guess the hardest part about writing the book was trying not to write too much. Yeah. Because the whole essence of it was to try to keep it nice and simple, nice and straightforward, without cluttering the mind, because there's more than enough information and whatever out there that just really tends to mess people's minds up. And that obviously manifests itself in a physical state of confusion. So neither of which are very helpful. So we had all the thoughts in our mind. We both have a very kind of similar outlook on the game, because we've always kind of looked at the game through the lens of, or the eyes of the golfer, rather than that of a golf coach. So as I say, so all of the ideas were in our heads, and it was really just a case of putting them down on paper, or laptop as it is in today's world, and then structuring them from there. We'd had these performance principles, as we've called them, on little cards that we were handing out to our students during our master classes in golf schools and whatever. And as Karl said, we're getting some quite remarkable results without really delving into the technicalities of it. So really, we had the basis there. It was just a case of expanding on, but not over-expanding, if you like.
Well, that's I'd like to see one of those cards. That sounds good, but I'm sure it's in the book.
We will send you one this afternoon.
I'm going to preface this a little bit. Karl, I listened to another podcast where you talked about the book Redirect, and I'm starting to read that. It's a fabulous book. Yeah. But, golfers always have stories about their putting. And there are so many, negative stories. I've got a couple really great players right now who are in the midst of that. Talk a little bit about why golfers create poor stories. Is it easy or difficult for them to change them? And how much of an impact this, what I'll call the barrage of, poor putting technique information kind of steer them into bad stories, poor stories?
Yeah, I think the thing is, Anthony, that humans are just a bunch of stories, whether it's putting or the rest of our life. It's, as Tim Wilson said in the book Redirect, with the stories that we live by, the narratives that we create. And, the old phrase that misery loves company is never truer than when we're looking at putting. And it, historically, when I was playing or trying to play and then coaching players on the European tour, and I still think it's still relevant today, that there almost seems a badge of honor that goes with good ball striking, but it's almost that somebody shouldn't be allowed to be a really good putter, and it's kind of like these Mr. Hogan talked about how putting should be made illegal, and I know it's tongue in cheek, but it's almost as though if you're really good on the greens, it's something that you shouldn't be doing. And I think these stories subconsciously can take hold. And the very fact that we create these stories, but we're actually unaware of their effect, because as we create these narratives inside of our head, as we talk about in the book, we've got the thinker and the prover, in the sense that inside of our mind, there's a thinker and the prover, and what the thinker thinks, the prover aims to prove. So if you're constantly regaling the world of stories about how bad you are on the greens, that your prover is constantly searching for evidence to back that up. So every 3-putt is a confirmation, every bad putting round is a confirmation, and we're pretty convinced that you'll really not change an awful lot about what you do on the greens unless you examine your story and you actually start to change that narrative. And then you can start to change the narrative with evidence to support the fact that you're learning something different. You've got a new approach, and you can't just magically say to yourself, I'm a great putter overnight, but you can begin to look at the old story and choose a different one. And that new story can be along the lines of discovery and exploration and possibility. And, we just find over and over again, when people become aware of the stories, that's the key thing. And then you can choose to go in a different direction.
Yeah, we really have seen a massive tidal shift, if you like, in the way that people talk about themselves with regard to their putting, and their performance is directly related to that. If you keep telling yourself you're not very good at something, then you've kind of set the bar pretty low, and it's very hard to improve when you've only set a very low bar, because the closer you get to, for example, let's say that let's say I'm golfer A, and I always have three putts in every round of golf. Now, if I'm standing on the 14th green and I've not had any 3 putts all day long, you know what's going to happen in 3 out of the next 4 holes. Because we keep telling ourselves, well, every time you play, you have 3 putts. I've not had any yet. God, I've only got a few holes left. Then your attention shifts, and you knock one 3 feet past, or leave it 4 feet short, whatever. So there's 1 3-putt in the bag. So now you start to feel a little bit more comfortable. Now you've only got 2 more to look forward to rather than 3. So it's incredible how as Karl said, the thinker and improver go to work very, very quickly on a subconscious level, and they do definitely have a major impact on performance. But as we have seen personally, that when we can kind of encourage a player to draw the line under their current story and become the author of the next chapter, if you like, the shift in performance is incredible. And you can actually see it's almost like a weight being lifted from their shoulders.
And there's actually, if there's any just simple reason to buy your book, there's 2 pages in it, basically with some guidance on how to write your old story and write it out and write your new story, right? And I'm guessing that's exactly the process you folks use when you're working with people.
And without getting too sort of alarmist about it, and is that you can look at this for something like putting, but you could take a far bigger picture of a person's life. The way that they are in business, the way they are with other people, will be bound together by their stories. And you can almost use golf as a nice laboratory, that you could begin on the greens to change your story, but don't be surprised if that can't then allow you to start looking at other stories that are holding you back. As Fred Shoemaker said in a podcast that I did with him recently, that there is a reality out there, but it's for sure that none of us are in it, in the sense that we all create our own reality. We all create our own interpretation of the world, and if that interpretation of the world is holding you back and that interpretation is making you miserable, that story, needs first of all bringing it out into the open, and then questioning, and then saying, okay, well, what story would you like it to be? What direction would you like to go? And the evidence is pretty strong when you actually write things down and it gets down on paper. You can see the old story for what it is, and then you get the chance to create a new direction. So you become the director of your show rather than just an actor following a script.
And I don't think it's till we actually realise it, we see it written in print, having written it with our own fair hand, that we start to realise how strong these stories are. We might carry these stories in our heads, but it's not until you commit pen to paper that you sit down and think, wow, actually that is me, and I could do better than that.
Well, another of the things I really liked in the book was what you called the 2 questions, but then there was another topic in it called, and you talked a lot about attention, and it seemed to me these were kind of connected, So talk about the 2 questions, and also, how they're connected to creating great attention in your putting performance.
Karl, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can go with that one. Well, for me, the word attention is everything. In the mental game of golf, or the mental game of life, in the sense that your experience of life, your experience on the greens, will be in direct relation to what you are paying attention to or what you're putting your attention on. And then we have this simple principle that either your attention is on something useful or useless to the task. And what we often say to people, if you've gone down a certain route with your putting, and you've been going down that route for 10 years, probably the 11th year isn't going to be the one that clinches it. So whether you are holing putts or not on the greens in that moment when you're out on the golf course will be as a result of what you put your attention on. Now, if you put your attention on how to move the putter, and you put your attention on how to move your body and all of those things, and you hole a load of putts on a regular basis, well, that is proving to be useful for you. And we'd be the first to say you should carry on with that. But if you find that you're really not performing as you could on the greens, then we challenge you to actually look at what your attention's on. And then we come to questions, because it'd be easy for me to say, now, everybody listening to this podcast, if you could just hear what's going on in the background, and we pause for a moment, everybody's attention will leave this podcast and they'll start tuning into the surroundings. Because the great thing about questions is questions focus your attention. So if attention is so important and questions focus your attention, then we really reinforce the idea that if you can ask a couple of good questions when you walk onto the green, you'll know that those questions are going to put your attention in areas that you deem useful for you. That ridiculously simple question of what does this ball need to do to go in the hole? for everybody listening, if you can imagine if you were on a green and you had got a putt from 10, 15 feet or whatever, and you ask that question, what does the ball need to do to go in the hole? That question draws your attention to the task. All of a sudden, you see the golf ball, you see the slope, you might see the entry point, you may create images, but what you're doing is you're creating a map of the task then, because that question has drawn you into that present moment. So it just, what is an incredibly simple concept, we believe, have really sort of profound implications for the game itself.
And I think the key point here is we're asking the question about what does the ball need to do? Not what do you need to do, what does the putter need to do, but what does the ball need to do? If you look at most golf coaching, teaching, instruction, whatever you want to call it, it's generally very much directed at what you need to do, what the putter needs to do, but the poor golf ball gets neglected. But ultimately, we're trying to get the ball in the hole, not ourselves or the putter. So it would make a bit more sense to pay attention to what the ball needs to do. So asking the first question, is it possible this ball could go in the hole? Is it possible I could hold this putt? Then obviously the answer is, until someone builds a brick wall or a bunker or a building between your ball and the hole, then yes, absolutely, that is possible. So then the next question would be, what does the ball need to do to go in the hole? So again, it draws your attention to the task, as Karl said, and that task is to get the ball into the hole. So again, the real key behind this is, well, one of the main key points is that it's directing our attention to what the ball needs to do, because ultimately that's what golf's all about.
There are two fabulous questions. I mean, if everybody could think about that when they're walking to the green, it could have a great impact on what they do. Well, let me put a little perspective on the next question and talking about speed control. And that is, I help a middle school team play golf, okay? Particularly. And, it's really occurred to me in the last 6 or 8 months that when I've been out there with them, I've probably paid too much attention. Helping them think about line and not speed, and just, getting a feel for what their speed control ought to be. And that they would be so much more, they're not going to be the world beater kids, but they would be so much farther along in their putting performance and fun if they focused much more on practicing speed control. So I know you two believe that creating great speed control is job one and being a great putter. So talk some about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about it logically, again, going back to kind of traditional golf coaching, golf teaching, it's all about all the gadgets, all the instruction in magazines and on YouTube. It's generally all about line. All the training aids are directed about line, start line, get your eyes over the ball, line, line, line. But if you think about it, the line doesn't really exist or cannot exist without pace, because the pace determines the line. So we have this image that we use to great effect of, if you've got a left to right breaking putt, if you can imagine there's actually enough room for 3 golf balls to fall into the hole on different lines at different paces. So pace gives you options on line, where a line kind of limits you to the perfect pace, if you like. So pace definitely, if pace and line and pace were brothers, then pace would definitely be the bigger brother with the bigger influence.
I still remember too. Who was it? Lee Westwood. My biggest image ever about, hope he doesn't listen to this, but he was the year that Tom Watson almost won. Lee Westwood came to the last hole and had, I think, a 30-foot putt, and he hit it 5 feet past and 3 putted, and he would have tied for the lead. He had great speed control. I don't know if you folks remember that, but it's just indelible in my mind forever.
We firmly believe, Tony, that for most people probably listening to the podcast, I would guess are probably 10 to 24 handicap players, and if they're really serious about trying to improve the scoring, if that's the goal, probably the quickest way that they could do that would be to reduce the amount of 3 putts that they have. And we have overwhelmingly found over the last few years that golfers are much better at line than they think and much worse at pace than they think. Because, as Gary said, all the attention goes on line. We're not saying line's not important. Obviously it's a huge part of putting. But one radical drill that we get, ranging from club players to tour players to do is just go onto the green. And these guys, if they've been obsessed with getting everything perfect, we say, just go up to a bunch of random putts and you're not allowed to even read the putt. You can't look at the terrain. Yeah. You can't do anything. All you got to do is just settle in behind the ball and you got to get the pace right. And overwhelmingly, we find that when people are just focusing on pace, hey, presto, the line is always pretty good. And as Gary said, when your pace is pretty good, you've got that 3-ball highway into the hole. So you could be a little bit out on your line, but if your pace is good, you'll still hold a bunch of putts. But at the very, very least, if your pace gets better, you'll reduce the amount of 3-putts that you have. And obviously that's going to have a massive bearing on the scoring that you do.
It's terrific guidance, I think, for sure. Now, another one of your principles you talk about is reading putts from the low side. And
yes,
I had to read that a few times to think about it, but it makes a lot of sense. So talk some about that and the value of that in terms of really understanding how to find the line in putts.
Well, I guess it kind of connects very much into the last topic we've just discussed, line and pace. If you don't know how long the putt is, how do you know how hard to hit it? Now, if we just look down the line of a putt, so any given putt, it tends to foreshorten the distance. We've all hit a shot on the golf course where you've hit it right down the flag and you think, oh, that's close, that's really close. And then you get up there and it's like 20 feet short and you're devastated because that depth perception has kind of skewed things a little bit. It looks like the ball's really close, but because we're looking right down the line, it foreshortens everything. Well, exactly the same thing happens in putting. So if you're only looking down the line to try to read a putt, again, your attention is going to be pretty much on line at the expense of pace. And it's not until we go down to the low side that we can actually see the length of the putt, whether it's a 3-foot putt or a 33-foot putt, that the length of that putt actually grows in front of your very eyes. And it's not until you go back down the line again that it shrinks. So you would never hit a shot from the middle of the fairway if you didn't know how far you had. But when was the last time anyone hit a putt when they didn't know how long it was?
When they really did, when they didn't really know how long it was. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't hit a 7-iron if you didn't know how far you had to go. But you would hit a putt because you think you're getting a good idea of the distance. But in reality, we only see, I don't know, you may miss 10, 15% of the total distance. And we're firm believers in the fact that that's largely why a lot of golfers leave most of their putts short, because they don't actually have a full understanding of just how long the putt is. If you go to the low side and stand far enough back so you've got ball and hole and peripheral vision, if you triangulate, if you like, it's like watching or looking at the putt in widescreen, in 3D, in HD. Basically, what we're trying to do is to read greens, basically, we're looking for clues. But if you've only got one clue by looking down the line, you're not exactly giving yourself the best opportunity to solve the puzzle, if you like. But by going to the low side, you start to see the undulations, you start to see just how far it is. And if you don't know how far the putt is, you don't know how hard to hit it. If you don't know how hard to hit it, how can you choose a line?
And you also see so many people that if they hit a putt that's big breaking putt, they and they tend to underread it, and then the ball ends up 3-4 feet to the right of it.
Yeah,
because they didn't really, right? I mean, I think that relates some to what you're talking about here too.
Absolutely, yeah, because they think, oh, I didn't get the line right, but they didn't get the line right because they didn't get the pace right. And if you trace it back to the root cause of that, was it a bad putt? May well have been, but the chances are it was a bad read. So they've misinterpreted the distance, which in turn leads to choosing the wrong line. So pace is essential, and in order to understand pace, green reading is really, really important, and reading every putt from the low side. Now, whether it's 2 or 3 feet or 32 feet, it doesn't really matter. One other thing that we've noticed is when you crouch down to look down the line of a putt, our eyes tend to skim over the first 2 or 3 feet and don't actually make contact with the ground until about 2 feet into the putt. Now, if you think about it, if the first 2 or 3 feet of that putt are uphill or downhill, that's going to have a massive influence on how hard we hit it, and how hard we hit it's going to have a massive influence on the line. So if we're missing out on that vital piece of information, it's going to be a real struggle.
Any more from you, I think, Karl, on this one?
Yeah. I think just to reinforce where we've been already, that what we tend to find when people are trying to improve their pace control is that if all of their attention is at their end of things on perfect alignment and technique and what the wrists, the shoulders, hands, whatever are doing, that can very often be at the compromise of being able to judge your feel for pace, because most other activities, if you stand on a green and you throw a ball from one person to another, most people are pretty good at that. They've instinctively got an ability to judge distance, but there's no way that their attention is on the release point of the right wrist or the angle of their elbow or anything like that. They look at the task, the person stood in front of them, and they instinctively feel that distance. So again, we see people when we get them to question what their attention's on, and we explain the importance of pace and get them a little bit more at the whole end of things, we find that becomes a revelation. And again, the paradox is when people free up and they're not so bound by trying to be perfect, the paradox is the technique tends to improve anyway. So we actually start to hear better putts. We actually see the putter moving on a better line, not because you're trying to do that, because of what your attention's on. So
I guess they're kind of letting their subconscious really control what's going on, and the subconscious is pretty smart, isn't it? It can make adjustments if you allow it to.
Well, the fact that we're still here after a few billion years, we've worked out a few more complex things than rolling a ball on a green.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let each of you now talk about maybe one or two of your favorite exercises or improvement exercises that are in the book. So whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
Yeah, mine would be so stupidly simple, but even with Tour Pros, we've had some pretty profound results with it. That if you look at your behaviour just before you play golf, most people will hit a few putts. But then if you look into what that activity currently is, I would guess there'll probably be 90% plus people who listening to this show probably go onto the green with 3 balls, and you roll the first one and it's a bit short, and then you roll the next one and it goes a bit past, and then, like the genius that you are, you manage to get the third one in the hole. Well, when you look at it, what is the requirement for what is the requirement? The fundamental requirement for putting is that you get good at predicting the behavior of the ball based on one attempt. That's all you get on the golf course. So if you only get one attempt to predict the behavior of the ball, surely that's what we should be practicing. So I really like the idea of switching with your putting practice, that you get out there just simply with one ball, create a bunch of random putts, medium range, long range. I quite like a drill. I call it 18 greens in regulation, where you imagine you've got the perfect ball striking round and you give yourself 18 different putts, short, medium, long, and you see what sort of score you would make. Just with that one ball, you're much more likely to go through your process. And one big point on this is that when you're out on the golf course, you have to create each putt in a unique moment in time. You've never had it before and you'll never get it again. And most of putting practice removes that process of creating putts in the mind, because you're stationary in one position, repeating the same thing over and over again. So as stupidly simple as it sounds, I would suggest for everybody to consider the behavior on the greens before they play, and maybe consider coming over to the one ball side of things and just recreate the demands of the game itself. Great.
I like that 18 balls in regulation. I've got some people I'm going to be out on the green with today, and I think they're going to hear that one.
But it's a fun game, and also, based over a period of time, you can get some good statistics on it. You can see what the patterns are for somebody who's really into the golf, and maybe at the higher level, you can see where do they match up? Is it short range that there's a problem, medium, long range? Is it left to right, right to left? But based on this principle of one attempt, not numerous attempts.
Well, very good. Well, I guess we're over to you, Gary, right?
Yeah, I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with Karl there. I think if you're going to work in your putting, you take what you're allowed on the golf course, which is generally a ball and a putter. You don't have a second serve. You don't have a third serve. So, as Karl said, you part of the skill of putting is predicting how the ball's going to behave. So if you're not, you're not predicting on the second one, you're learning from you're taking feedback from the first one on your second putt, and again on the third putt, you have the benefit of feedback from the first two putts. So most people will be able to figure out what to do with the third one, but unfortunately we do not have that luxury on the golf course. One drill that we use to great effect is what we call the little ladder drill. And we're actually in the process of kind of putting together a video version of the book, if you like, with lots of exercises in it. And one of the exercises we use is we use the putter grip to create a semicircle of tees around the hole, which is about a foot beyond the hole, or around the hole, I should say. From the center of the hole, we create a semicircle of tees, and then we take a pace, 2 paces, 3 paces, 4 paces. So the object of the exercise is to either from certainly, first of all, from one pace, you've got to get the ball either into the hole or keep it within that 1 foot radius around the hole. If you hold the putt or it stays within that semicircle of tees, you're allowed to move on to 2 paces. So it sounds like a really simple drill, but again, you don't get a second chance at it from the same place. If you hold the first one, you're allowed to move on to level 2, if you like. And then if you hold that one or you keep it in the semicircle, you're allowed to move on to level 3. So you get further and further away. Or you can randomize it. You can go from 3 feet away to 12 feet, then back to 6 feet, then to 9 feet. So you can mix it up a little bit. So, again, training how you're going to play on the golf course, because not every putt's going to be in sequence 3 feet, 6 feet, 9 feet, 12 feet. So we mix it up a little bit. And it sounds like such a simple task to get your ball within a foot of the hole. It's got to be at least up to the hole. And if you can keep it within a foot past the hole, then guess what you've become very good at pace. If you become good at pace, as we suggested earlier, you're virtually going to eliminate 3 putting. So it's a fantastic drill, and if you've got a training partner, a practice partner, it can become extremely competitive and extremely addictive. So be careful when you use this drill.
Well, that's good. Well, it would be good to be addicted to a great putting improvement drill, right? I mean,
absolutely.
How could anything be better than that?
Exactly.
Well, I really appreciate the two of you taking the time today to talk with me, and so let's kind of end and any key conclusions and takeaways that each of you wants to talk about for a minute or two that you want to either remind people of or amplify that you have not said before.
We have said it, but I'd just reinforce, become very interested in attention. What is your attention on before the putt? What is your attention on when you're actually over the ball? How do you react afterwards? What do you pay attention to when the ball has either gone in the hole or not? And the more you become aware of your unique attention DNA as a unique human being, the more you kind of put the pieces of the jigsaw together and find out what is it that you need to pay attention to release your capability, not just on the greens but in the rest of the game. And then it becomes really fascinating that you're personalizing what you need to do, as opposed to just always working on a bunch of positions that maybe somebody else has suggested to you. So you eventually get to the point where you own your own game rather than constantly relying on somebody else to point out where you're going wrong. The
best players do own their own games, don't they?
Absolutely.
They always have done. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, then, Gary, you get the final word, I guess, huh?
What a pleasure.
Yeah.
For me, it would be as simple as pay more attention to what the ball has to do. Whether it's on the putting green, on the tee, from the fairway, in a bunker, whatever it is, Because as we suggested earlier, pretty much all golf coaching, teaching, instruction, whatever you want to call it, is very much about what you need to do, what the club needs to do, but very much at the expense of what the ball needs to do. So if nothing else, pay more attention to what the ball has to do, and pay attention to what you want to do with the golf ball, what you want to be creative with the golf ball.
Yeah. Neat way to end. And I'm going to put a little, sort of a mini plug in here too. I think it's mid-September that your next book is out, right? At least I looked on the website. Is that true?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I think the third week in September is the release date.
That's really exciting.
So
I'm sure
we're really
the lost art of
that.
playing golf, right?
Yeah, we're just going through the final edit as we speak. So, my mind's kind of fried trying to read through that again I don't know how many times I've read it so far, but
if you want an outside person to look at it, I know somebody that could do that. But I'm going to read it when it comes. I'm going to read it when it comes out. I promise.
We might just take you up on that.
Well, I'm certain that if you guys are interested, and hopefully we can keep Skype working, that I'd love to have you back in a few months and talk about that. I'm sure it's going to be as good as this book. I'm going to put links in the show notes to your website and where people can get in touch with you. And you've done something pretty neat here, and you know it too. You know it too. It's something that's really valuable for golfers and help them have more fun. And
I think we kind of become detached from that sometimes, don't we?
Yeah. Well, very good. Gary and Karl, thanks. I'm going to sign off in a minute, let you hang in for just a second, but this has been a great interview, and I know golfers are going to really enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you,
Tony. It's been an absolute
pleasure.
Tony.
Game Improvement Golf. I create exceptional golf clubs. You shoot lower scores.
The Lost Art of Putting is a book that all golfers who want to make more putts should have in their libraries. A very easy read, but it includes some profound information in it. I put links in the show notes for the Lost Art of Putting website, and also how you can directly contact Gary and Karl at their individual websites. And watch for their new book, the third week of September, The Lost Art of Playing Golf. I know it's going to be a great resource for golfers. Well, my shout out today is for my friend Chris Griffin, the golf coach for the Roane State Community College golf team. Last year was the rebirth of the Roane State golf team. I think it came back from 1982 was the last time there was a team at Roane State. And I continue to be excited that I get to help the team with putting coaching and custom club fitting. Thanks, Chris, for your dedication to Roane State Golf and for letting me assist the team. Well, one more thing before we kind of sign off. Your favorite true custom club fitter and putting coach shot 75 last week. This was actually the third round that I've played since my surgery in mid-May. I have to say that this was an unexpected result, but I wonder if that contributed to the fact that I just played freely and easily and hit a lot of great shots. Something to ponder. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, a great interview with Mike Romatowski, developer of the Mach 3 Golf speed training process and program. Almost all of us can benefit from being able to swing faster, and Mike will share some of his knowledge about how to do just that. See you in 2 weeks.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com